Let's now turn our attention briefly to Jira Service Desk approvals and automation. As we have seen, we can build approval and automation type functionality into any Jira workflow by adding conditions, validators, and post functions as needed. But Jira Service Desk specifically ships with native approval functionality and automation rules, which are powerful and easy to configure. We will look at them in this module. These out-of-the-box features still allow for workflow customization and extension, but it's good to be aware of the power of Service Desk built-in features. First, let's review workflow permissions related specifically to Jira Service Desk projects. To use workflows in Jira Service Desk projects, users need Browse Projects permission to see the project at all, and they need Transition Issues permission to see any of the transitions. This is just like in Jira Core and Jira Software. But specifically in Jira Service Desk, users also need Jira Service Desk application access to be able to see any transitions in Service Desk workflows and to see other features like queues, SLAs, etc. Namely, they have to be licensed agents. If users have Transition Issues permission but not Service Desk application access, they will not see workflow buttons. Finally, in addition to the above, users need any other permission, groups, project roles as required by workflow conditions or validators. Next, we need to understand the mapping of request types to issue types to workflow scheme in a Service Desk project. Jira Service Desk provides a set of default request types configured for each project template. You can configure the default request types or add new ones as needed. Each request type in a Service Desk is based on a Jira issue type. Note that a single Jira issue type can be the basis for many different request types. In this example, Get IT Help request type and Set up VPN to the Office request type are both mapped to the single Service Request issue type. And as we already know, issue types are mapped to workflows in a workflow scheme. And workflow schemes are associated with one or more projects. In a Service Desk project, therefore, request types are mapped to issue types are mapped to workflows in a workflow scheme, and workflow schemes are associated with projects. There are default Service Desk workflows which feature native out-of-the-box approval functionality, such as the two shown here. They make it easy to add approvals to certain steps. Some Service Desk requests might need approval before your team can work on them. For example, an IT manager might approve new system accounts. People don't need a Jira Service Desk license to approve requests. They just have to be customers of the Service Desk project. Let's see how Service Desk approvals are configured. Here's how approvals fit into the Service Desk request workflow. A person sends a request via the customer portal or email. When the request transitions to a status that needs approval, the approver is notified that there's a pending approval. In this case, the workflow already begins with an approval status called Waiting for Approval. In the customer portal, the approver approves or declines the request. The request transitions to the next status in the workflow, and the customer is notified about any comments that the approver added. Let's see how each element is configured. To require approval for a request, you can add an approval to the workflow that the request follows. You can choose when in the workflow approval is required. In the workflow shown, the request goes to approvers right after it's created. The following steps are performed. Select the status you want to add an approval to. Here, it's the Needs Approval status. Make sure the status you want to add the approval to has at least two transitions, one for approve and one for decline. You might add another transition if you'd like an agent to be able to transition a request without a response from an approver. Select Add Approval. Complete the fields, then click Create. Approval transitions don't display screens on the customer portal. so a resolution should be set automatically if the request goes to a done status. Here are the elements that must then be configured. You must choose who can approve the request. You can have customers choose approvers from a list, or you can send requests to a preset list of approvers. For example, the customer can search for their manager in a list. Either way, a user picker field used for approvers must be added to the request form. By default, projects come with the Approvers field, but a different field can be created and configured. If the user is shown on the request type, customers can choose approvers. But you must first ensure that customers can search for them. Go to Project Settings, Customer Permissions, and make sure the setting Who can customers share requests with is set to Any customer or organization by searching in this project. Or otherwise, you can set up preset lists of approvers by adding a User Picker custom field to the request and clicking Actions Hide. Then enter the users who can approve the request and click Set. The preset approvers will automatically display in the issue and be notified when the request needs approval. You also choose the required number of approvers, whether to consider the request approved after all approvals or a certain number of approvals. Finally, you choose the approved and declined transitions. Note also that multiple approval steps can be configured in a workflow. Service Desk ships with powerful automation rules that helps with repetitive tasks and the sending of important notifications. The rules can be broken down into ones that transition issues, send alerts, or update issues. There are two rules to transition issues. Transition on comment is used when a comment is added to an issue. Then the rule automatically transitions the issue, so it's clear who it's waiting on. For example, if the request is currently in the status waiting for customer, and the customer adds a comment on the customer portal, then the request is automatically transitioned to waiting for support. The second rule is reopen on customer comment. When a comment is added to a resolved issue, for example, the reporter notes that the resolution doesn't actually fix the problem, then this rule will reopen the issue. There are three rules to send alerts. The first one is beware of urgent issues. This rule alerts you to urgent issues when they are raised, so you can address them immediately. The second one, keep on top of SLAs, alerts you to at-risk SLAs. For example, those that are about to breach in 30 minutes, so you can stay on top of those important issues. Finally, the rule set customer expectations lets customers know of expected resolution times when they raise a request. And there are two rules to update issues. The first one is update when a linked issue changes. When the status of an issue changes, this rule will add a comment to its related issues. You can customize this to resolve related issues, change which issues are updated, and more. The second one is triage requests sent by email. It automatically sets the right request type based on keywords in the requests sent by email. And finally, you can create your own custom rule. Here is how rules work. Each rule works in a similar way. It performs actions based on specific events and conditions. Rules consist of a set of when, if, then configurations. The when portion denotes events that trigger the rule, such as when a comment is added or edited, when an issue is created, or when the status is changed. You can have multiple triggers in a rule. The if portion denotes optional conditions. That is, once the rule is triggered, check if certain conditions are met. For example, if the issue matches certain fields, status, reporter, priority, or a JQL query. Or if the user type is customer or agent, or not a customer or not an agent. There are other conditions depending on the triggers selected. For example, if the comment visibility is internal or external, or if the comment contains a key phrase. Conditions can have branches, like else if statements. Each branch will have its own action, the then part. So the final portion is then, which denotes the action. What happens when the rule is triggered and the condition is met? The rule can transition an issue, add comments, alert users, edit the request type, edit the issue, send email or webhook, or auto-approve or decline requests. Who configures rules? Either Jira administrators or project administrators can configure rules. And rules can be configured to run as either a project default user, such as Jira administrator or an agent, or as the user who triggered the rule. Now let's look at why you might use automation instead of the type of workflow customization we have discussed thus far. In regular workflow customization, some things can be automated, such as triggering transitions in Jira software when events occur in development tools. But the primary focus is on what happens when the user presses the transition manually. In contrast, much of the usefulness of automation is that it occurs behind the scenes without user intervention. You don't have to wait for the user to click a transition. It can occur automatically based on the right set of conditions. Nor do you have to set up a saved filter in a subscription in Jira to know when SLAs are about to breach. You can have an automation rule do the heavy lifting. Secondly, automation rules can easily be configured by project administrators. As we will see, project administrators have limited workflow customization ability if the extended project administration permission is granted. We will look at that at the next module. But even if it is, they still cannot do everything in the workflow, like add conditions, validators, post functions, or transition screens. But with automation rules, project administrators have much more power and control to actually create and maintain the rules. And finally, JSD automation provides a lot of rich out-of-the-box functionality, such as transitioning issues, adding comments, and alerting users, which is easier to configure and maintain. Though you may achieve the same goals by customizing Jira workflow, as we have seen, this oftentimes involves the use of marketplace apps and the knowledge of how to set up and maintain all the transition configurations. It's worth noting that you can use both together. You can make customizations to default service desk workflows and also take advantage of automation rules, because not everything can be achieved with service desk automation. Just be careful to understand what could conflict. And of course, not all projects are service desk projects. But if you have a choice, then try to use the automation rules. Let's now look at an example of how the same business requirements can be achieved both ways, using customization or using automation. Let's say that your support process entailed creating an original support ticket and then creating and linking all duplicates to it. Then, when the original ticket was being resolved, you wanted to comment on and resolve all of the duplicates. Here is how that would be done. You would edit the workflow of the original issues and add a post function or two from a marketplace app in order to add a comment to all linked issues of a particular link type, duplicates, and then to actually transition those duplicate issues to their resolved status. To accomplish this, you need to be a Jira administrator and have a marketplace app, and it takes quite a few steps to accomplish, first to create and then to maintain. Alternatively, with Jira Service Desk installed, you can set up an automation rule in a Service Desk project. This automation rule is the equivalent of the previous workflow customization. It's based on the preset update when a linked issue changes, and modified to actually close the duplicates. This is how to read it. When a linked issue is transitioned, namely the original issue, if that original issue now has a resolution, that is, it's being resolved, and the link type is duplicates, then add a comment to all of the duplicate issues saying that the original issue was resolved and the duplicate issues themselves are resolved. The rule runs immediately when triggered, and you can further customize it as well. It comes natively in Jira Service Desk and is easy to configure, modify, or disable in the future. So finally, let's look at some automation best practices. Make sure the person configured to run the rules has permission to complete all of the actions taken by the rule. If the automation rule is to transition issue and the transition in the workflow has conditions and validators, make sure the user executing the rule meets the configurations in the workflow. Otherwise, the automation will fail to execute. By default, rules can trigger other rules. You may need to disable this to prevent rules from triggering each other, which could lead to infinite loops. And if business requirements can be satisfied by customizing a workflow or using Jira Service Desk automation out-of-the-box functionality, then use the latter instead. And finally, test and evaluate the automation in a staging environment first before applying in production. We'll talk more about that in the upcoming module.